Park. It's a really wet day this morning, isn't it? So I just thought to myself, I'm going to spend a little bit of my time reading a story for our YouTube channel. Now, my son has helped me pick this morning from his bookshelf, and this is going to be the story of Peter Pan. It's a special book because it's also a pop-up, and you'll hear some music as well. So I hope you enjoy it. So here we go, Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. So it begins. Mr. and Mrs. Darling had 3 children, Wendy, John and Michael. On the fateful night, Mr. and Mrs. Darling had gone out to dinner. Most evenings, the Darlings' prim old dog Nana kept an eye on her charges from her bed in the nursery. But that night, Mr. Darling had decided she should sleep outside. So when a tiny light flew in through the nursery's open window, Nana could do nothing but bark and bark and bark. The light began darting about the nursery, flitting inside jars and into open drawers. The next moment, in flew a young boy, dressed in a tunic of leaves. It was none other than Peter Pan. "Tink, have you found my shadow?" he called. And in reply came a lovely sound like the tinkling of tiny bells. Tinker Bell, because of course that is who the light was, told him to look for it in the chest of drawers. In a flash the drawers were open, and there it was, the missing shadow. Peter tried to stick it on with soap, but the wretched thing would not stay. His angry sobs woke up Wendy. "Boy," she said, "why are you crying?" Peter introduced himself, bowing politely. When Wendy found out he didn't have a mother, she felt very sorry for him and immediately offered to sew his shadow back on, then set to work with a needle and thread. Reunited with his shadow, Peter danced around the room. Wendy offered to give him a kiss to celebrate, but he didn't know what a kiss was. So that he would not feel silly, Wendy told Peter her thimble was a kiss and gave it to him. He looked at it for a moment and then solemnly gave Wendy an acorn in return, which she hung around her neck. Peter told Wendy all about his home, a place called Neverland, full of fairies and mermaids and pirates, and his loyal band of friends, the Lost Boys. He introduced Tinker Bell, who called her a great ugly girl, but luckily Wendy couldn't understand fairy language. Peter said he had lost his shadow when he came to the nursery to hear a bedtime story. When Wendy said she knew many stories herself, he begged her to come back to Neverland with him. At first she said no, but when John and Michael woke up and found out Peter could teach them how to fly, it was all decided. He sprinkled fairy dust on them and told them to think happy thoughts. Nothing happened at first, but with a little practice, and I'm sorry to say, without a second thought for their poor parents, the children zoomed up and out of the nursery window. Neverland and the Shot. "Where is Neverland, Peter?" asked Wendy. "Second to the right and straight on till morning," cried Peter. But as they flew across the sleeping city and out over the sea, it became clear that the journey would take them much longer than a night. Sometimes it was dark and sometimes it was light, but none of them knew how long they flew. "There it is," said Peter at last, "where all the arrows are pointing." And indeed the sun was pointing 1,000,000 golden arrows at an island. They had finally reached Neverland. The children pointed out places they knew from dreams, and Peter told them of the pirate leader, Captain Hook. "He was Blackbeard's boatswain," said Peter, "and he has a fearsome hook where his right hand should be. The only thing that he's afraid of is the crocodile who ate that hand. It took a liking to him and follows him about, trying to eat the rest of him. Luckily for Hook, the crocodile also swallowed a clock, so you can always tell when it is near from the ticking." Just then, Tinker Bell told Peter that the pirates had seen them and were aiming to shoot them with Long Tom, their biggest gun. Because her fairy light might give away their position, Tink hid in John's hat, which Wendy carried. Suddenly, there was the most tremendous crash. Long Tom blew the little group apart, the wind from the shot blasting John and Michael one way, Wendy another, and Peter far out to sea. Wendy and Tink decided to fly towards Peter's house, but the fairy was so jealous of her, because the big girl knew all sorts of stories and was now Peter's favourite, that she began pinching poor Wendy until she cried. Far below, all the Lost Boys, Tootles, Curly, Slightly, the twins and Nibs, were waiting for Peter to come home and heard Wendy's cries. "A great white bird's flying this way," shouted Nibs. "What kind of bird do you think?" asked Slightly. "I don't know," said Nibs, "but it's making an awful din." Now they could also hear Tinker Bell's shrill voice. "Peter wants you to shoot Wendy." "I think there are birds called Wendy's," said Curly eagerly. Tootles had his bow and arrow with him. "Out of the way, Tink," he cried, and fired. The arrow hit its target and Wendy fluttered to the ground. A terrible silence fell upon the wood. "This is no bird," said Slightly. "I think it must be a lady." "Peter must have brought her," said Curly. "A lady to take care of us, and you have killed her." It was just at this tragic moment that Peter arrived. "I'm back, boys," he cried. "Why don't you all cheer? I have brought a mother for you all at last." But no boy made a sound. "Have you seen her?" "I will show you, Peter," said Tootles quietly. Peter knelt down beside Wendy and picked up the arrow. "Whose arrow?" he asked sternly. "Mine, Peter," said Tootles. Peter raised his fist, but something stopped him. It was Wendy. She had raised her arm to stop Peter's hand. "The Wendy lives!" cried Nibs. "Look," said Peter, pointing at the acorn that hung around Wendy's neck. "The arrow struck the kiss I gave her, and it saved her life." Peter begged Wendy to get better quickly so he could show her the wonders of Neverland, but she could not answer because she was winded by the fall. When the boys told Peter of Tink's crime, he looked very stern. "Listen, Tinker Bell," he cried. "I am not your friend any more. Go from here forever." Tink flew to his shoulder and begged, and when Wendy raised her arm again to plead for the fairy, Peter gave in and said it would only be for a week. But what should be done with Wendy? "Let's carry her into our home," said Curly. "No," said Peter. "She's too ill. We must build a house around her. Boys, bring all the best things from our home." Just then, John and Michael found the little gathering and were put to work too. The boys made walls from branches, a mossy roof and yellow leaf curtains for the windows. The sole of Tootle's shoe became the door knocker, and John's hat the chimney. After Wendy had rested for a little while, the boys knocked on her door. When she came outside, they all went down on their knees and cried, "Oh, Wendy lady, be our mother." Wendy wasn't sure. She had never been a mother, but Peter said that they just needed a nice motherly person, which was exactly what Wendy was, so she agreed. The next day, Peter measured Wendy, John and Michael for their own hollow trees, the only way to get into the home under the ground. Each tree had to fit its owner perfectly, or else they couldn't get up and down. Once you were fitted, you drew in your breath at the top and down you went into the secret house. To get back up, you had to breathe out and wriggle back up. And so the darling children began their life in the home under the trees. It was really one large room with a huge never tree growing in the middle. Every morning the boys sawed through the trunk, making it level with the floor. And by tea time it was always 2 feet high, so it was a perfect dinner table. At night they let down a huge bed, and the boys slept in it like sardines in a tin. Tink slept in her little house, a shelf in the wall, decorated in the height of fairy fashion. Everyone was happy in the home under the trees. Adventures happened daily, and to tell them all would need a book as large as a dictionary. But we do have just enough time for the tale of the Mermaid's Lagoon. Now, East Park, that's quite a long video so far. You can still hear the book there. Tune in later on for the next part of Peter Pan. See you all soon.